In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt walked onto a hilltop in southeastern Turkey and realized he was standing on top of something that should not exist. Buried under the dirt were massive stone pillars carved with animals, arranged in precise circles, and built with a level of engineering that nobody in 9600 BC was supposed to be capable of. The site was called Gobekli Tepe, and it was at least 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. Schmidt spent the next 2 decades excavating, and with every layer he uncovered, the story got stranger, because Gobekli Tepe was not a village, it was not a settlement, it was a monument, a deliberate, planned, enormous construction project carried out by people who, according to every textbook written before that dig, were supposed to be wandering around in animal skins hunting deer. The oldest known temple on Earth was built by people we were told could barely survive. And once you start pulling on that thread, the entire timeline of human civilization starts to unravel. Because Gobekli Tepe is not the only place that does not fit the story we have been told. And every pyramid on this planet, from Egypt to Mexico to Indonesia, seems to point back to the same impossible origin. If you want to subscribe, now is the time. This is going to take a while. To understand why Gobekli Tepe shattered the accepted timeline, you need to understand what the accepted timeline actually was. For most of the 20th century, the story went like this. Humans were hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years. Then, around 4000 to 3000 BC, they figured out farming in Mesopotamia. Farming created surplus food created settlements, settlements created social hierarchy created organized labor, and organized labor created monuments. That was the progression. Farming first, civilization second, monuments last. It was clean, logical, and accepted by virtually every archaeology department on the planet. Gobekli Tepe destroyed that sequence overnight. Here was a site built around 9600 BC, a full 5,000 years before the earliest known farming communities. The pillars weighed between 10 and 20 tons each. They were quarried from limestone bedrock, using tools that should not have existed at that scale. The carvings were not crude scratches, they were detailed, deliberate, and consistent across multiple structures. Foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, cranes, boars, and abstract humanoid figures, all rendered with a sophistication that implied generations of artistic tradition, not a sudden burst of creativity by people who had never attempted anything like this before. And the site was not built all at once. Radar surveys revealed that what Schmidt uncovered was only about 5% of the total complex. Beneath the surface, there were at least 20 stone circles layered on top of each other, spanning centuries of continuous construction. The labor force required would have been enormous. Hundreds of workers, at minimum, coordinated over long periods, fed, organized, and directed toward a common purpose. This was not a lucky accident by a group of nomads who got bored one winter. This was a sustained, multi-generational building program carried out by an organized society that technically was not supposed to exist yet. But here is where things get truly uncomfortable. The oldest layers at Gobekli Tepe are the most sophisticated. The deepest circles, the ones dating back to roughly 1600 BC, have the largest pillars, the most intricate carvings, and the most precise engineering. As you move up through the layers, the construction actually gets worse. Smaller pillars, cruder carvings, less precision, less ambition in the overall design. The site does not show a civilization learning how to build. It shows a civilization forgetting. That pattern should bother anyone who takes the standard timeline seriously, because it suggests that whoever built the earliest layers of Gobekli Tepe inherited their knowledge from somewhere else, somewhere older, somewhere we have not found yet. They arrived at that hilltop in Turkey already knowing how to do this, and over the centuries that followed, that knowledge gradually faded. And this is exactly where the pyramid problem begins. Egypt's Great Pyramid at Giza was supposedly built around 2060 BC by Pharaoh Khufu. That is what the textbooks say. But there are problems with that claim, and they are not small problems. The Great Pyramid contains roughly 2.3 million stone blocks. The average block weighs about 2.5 tons. Some of the granite blocks in the King's Chamber weigh up to 80 tons. They were quarried in Aswan, roughly 500 miles south, transported up the Nile, and then moved overland to the Giza Plateau. The logistics alone are staggering, but it is the precision that truly defies explanation. The base of the pyramid is level to within less than 1 inch across more than 750 feet. The sides are aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a single degree. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height produces a number that matches pi to 3 decimal places. The internal chambers are positioned with a precision that would challenge modern surveyors using laser equipment. To build this structure in the roughly 20-year reign of Khufu, workers would have needed to quarry, transport, shape and place one block every 2 to 3 minutes, around the clock, for 2 straight decades. That means 0 breaks, 0 delays, 0 mistakes and 0 slowdowns for weather, supply problems or anything else. And yet the tools found from that era are copper chisels and stone hammers. Not a single piece of advanced tooling has ever been recovered from the 4th Dynasty period. Engineers have been arguing about this for over a century, and the honest ones, the ones who actually work with stone and heavy machinery for a living, will tell you the same thing. We could build the Great Pyramid today, but it would be the most expensive and complex construction project on the planet. And we would need modern cranes, laser-guided surveying equipment, and computer-aided design to match the precision that the builders achieved with supposedly primitive tools. The idea that it was done with copper chisels and wooden sledges by a civilization that had only been building in stone for a few centuries requires you to believe in something close to a miracle. But Egypt is only the beginning. Fly 12,000 miles southeast from Giza to a volcanic mountain in West Java, Indonesia. There, buried under layers of soil and vegetation, sits a structure called Gunung Padang. For decades, locals considered it a sacred hill covered in ancient stone terraces. Pilgrims climbed it, farmers worked around it, nobody suspected what was underneath. Then, starting in 2011, a team led by Indonesian geologist Danny Hilman Natawijaya began drilling core samples into the hillside. What they found sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Gunung Padang is not a hill with stones on top of it. It is a constructed pyramid buried under thousands of years of volcanic sediment. Ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple layers of construction beneath the surface. The deepest layers, which sit on carved basalt bedrock, returned radiocarbon dates that initially seemed impossible. The research team published findings in the journal Archaeological Prospection in 2023, reporting construction phases stretching back thousands of years. The oldest detectable layers showed evidence of deliberate shaping and placement of columnar basalt, suggesting organized construction far earlier than conventional models would predict for that region. The reaction from mainstream archaeology was immediate and hostile. Critics argued the carbon dating might reflect natural geological processes rather than human activity. They questioned the methodology. They questioned the team's interpretations. The team stood by their data. The debate continues, and it is getting louder. But regardless of the exact dates, one thing is difficult to dispute. Gunung Padang's core structure shows evidence of deliberate, organized construction at a scale that does not match any known culture in the region from that era. The columnar basalt was not randomly deposited by volcanic activity. It was placed, arranged, built. Sound familiar? Now go to South America. In the highlands of Bolivia, at nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, sit the ruins of Tiahuanaco and its neighboring site, Puma Punku. Puma Punku contains stone blocks cut with a precision that still baffles engineers today. Some of the blocks are made of red sandstone quarried from a site 10 miles away. Others are made of andesite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, quarried from a volcanic source over 50 miles distant and transported up a mountain. The blocks are cut with perfectly flat surfaces, precise right angles, and interlocking shapes that fit together without mortar, like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle designed by someone who understood engineering at an advanced level. Some of the cuts are so clean and so uniform that they look machine-made. Several of the H-shaped blocks have identical dimensions repeated across multiple pieces, as though they were manufactured from a template. In fact, several engineers who have examined the site have openly said they do not know how the cuts were achieved with any pre-industrial technology. The official dating for Tiahuanaco places it around 500 AD, but the Bolivian archaeologist Arthur Poznansky spent decades arguing that the site was far older, based on astronomical alignments built into the temple complex. His analysis, which measured the angle of the Sun Temple's alignment relative to the solstice, suggested a construction date of around 15,000 BC. His work was dismissed for decades. But more recent geological surveys of the area have raised uncomfortable questions about the standard timeline. The site shows evidence of catastrophic flooding. Massive stone blocks have been displaced and scattered in patterns consistent with enormous water movement. Blocks weighing dozens of tons tossed around like furniture in a flood. And the shoreline of nearby Lake Titicaca has shifted dramatically over the millennia, suggesting that the landscape looked very different when the original structures were built. Something was here before the Tiwanaku culture that mainstream archaeology credits with the construction. And whatever it was, it could work stone at a level that the credited builders never demonstrated again. This pattern keeps showing up, and it always looks the same. A site with extraordinary precision and scale. A credited builder culture that never demonstrated comparable skill before or after. Evidence of much older construction beneath the recognized layers. And a mainstream timeline that requires you to ignore the physical evidence in favor of the accepted narrative. Let us go back to Egypt, specifically to the Great Sphinx of Giza. The Sphinx is traditionally dated to around 2500 BC, credited to Pharaoh Khafra. But in 1991, geologist Robert Schoch from Boston University published a study that changed the conversation entirely. Schoch examined the erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure, the trench carved into the bedrock around the monument. He found deep, rounded, vertical erosion channels running down the walls of the enclosure. This type of erosion is caused by one thing and one thing only: prolonged heavy rainfall running down the rock face over centuries. The problem is obvious. Egypt has been a desert for roughly 5,000 years. The Giza Plateau receives almost no rain today. The last time that region received sustained heavy rainfall was during a period known as the Nabataean Pluvial, which ended around 8,000 to 7,000 BC. Schoch's conclusion was straightforward. The Sphinx enclosure shows thousands of years of water erosion. That erosion could only have occurred when Egypt received heavy rainfall. That rainfall ended no later than 70,000 BC. Therefore, the Sphinx, or at least the original core body, was carved sometime before that date, potentially as far back as 1000 to 12,000 BC. Egyptologists pushed back hard. They argued the erosion could be caused by salt crystallization, sand exposure, or subsurface moisture. But Schoch was not an armchair theorist making guesses from his living room. He is a tenured geology professor who has spent his career studying rock weathering, and multiple other geologists who have examined the site independently have reached similar conclusions. The erosion pattern on the Sphinx enclosure does not match wind and sand erosion seen elsewhere on the Giza Plateau. It matches water erosion. If the Sphinx is genuinely that old, it predates dynastic Egypt by thousands of years. It would mean that a sophisticated culture capable of carving a 240-foot monument from solid bedrock existed on the Giza Plateau long before Khufu, Khafra, or any pharaoh we have on record. And here is something that does not get discussed enough. The Sphinx faces due east. It stares directly at the point on the horizon where the sun rises on the spring equinox. But there is more to it than that. Due to a phenomenon called axial precession, the constellations visible at the spring equinox shift slowly over a 26,000-year cycle. Today, the sun rises in Pisces on the equinox. In a few centuries, it will rise in Aquarius. Around 10 to 500 BC, the sun rose in the constellation Leo on the spring equinox. Leo, the lion. The Sphinx is a lion, facing east, staring at the exact point where, in 10 to 500 BC, its own constellation would have risen with the sun on the most astronomically significant day of the year. Coincidence is a word that does a lot of heavy lifting in mainstream archaeology, but at some point you have to ask how many coincidences you are willing to accept before you consider the possibility that someone was encoding a date into stone. Now look at the pyramids themselves through an astronomical lens. The 3 pyramids at Giza are arranged in a specific pattern. 2 large pyramids in a line with the 3rd smaller one offset slightly to the left. In 1994, Robert Bauval published The Orion Mystery, in which he argued that this layout mirrors the 3 stars of Orion's belt. The 2 brighter stars, Alnitak and Alnilam, correspond to the 2 larger pyramids. The slightly dimmer star, Mintaka, which is offset from the line, corresponds to the smaller offset 3rd pyramid. The size ratio and the positional offset both match. Bauval went further. He used astronomical software to calculate when Orion's belt would have been positioned in the sky at the exact angle that matches the pyramid layout on the ground. The answer was around 10 to 500 BC, the same date suggested by the Sphinx's erosion. The same date suggested by its astronomical alignment with Leo, the same era as Gobekli Tepe. 10 to 500 BC keeps showing up like a signal buried in the noise. And once you notice it, you cannot stop seeing it. But the astronomical connections do not stop at Giza. The temple complex at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, built in the 12th century AD, mirrors the constellation Draco. The arrangement of the main temples across the Angkor region matches the star pattern as it appeared around 10 to 500 BC, not as it appeared when the temples were actually constructed in the medieval period. The builders encoded a date thousands of years before their own era into the layout of their greatest achievement. Teotihuacan in Mexico, the enormous pyramid complex outside Mexico City, has its 3 main structures arranged in a pattern that researchers have compared to Orion's belt, with the same offset arrangement as Giza. The Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the smaller Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent echo the same celestial template. The Thornborough Henges in northern England, 3 massive Neolithic earthworks dating back over 5,000 years, are arranged in a pattern that mirrors Orion's belt with the same proportional spacing. Different continents, different eras, different cultures with no known contact. The same astronomical template repeated over and over. Either every major ancient civilization independently decided to map the same constellations onto the ground in the same way, or they were all working from a shared source of knowledge, and that source would need to predate all of them. Graham Hancock, the journalist and author who has spent 40 years investigating these connections, calls this source civilization the lost civilization of the Ice Age. His argument is not that aliens built the pyramids. His argument is simpler and in many ways more threatening to the established narrative. He proposes that an advanced human civilization existed during the last Ice Age, roughly 12,000 to 13,000 years ago. This civilization had sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and mathematics, and it was largely destroyed by the catastrophic events that ended the Ice Age, leaving only fragments of knowledge scattered among the survivors. The Younger Dryas period, which began around 12,800 years ago and ended around 11,600 years ago, was one of the most violent climate episodes in human history. Global temperatures plunged dramatically and suddenly. Ice sheets that had been retreating surged back, and when the period finally ended, the melt was catastrophic. Sea levels eventually rose by as much as 400 feet. Coastlines where civilizations tend to develop were swallowed by the ocean. In 2007, a team of researchers proposed the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, suggesting that the sudden cooling was triggered by a comet or asteroid fragment striking the North American ice sheet. Since then, evidence supporting this hypothesis has continued to accumulate. A thin layer of nanodiamonds, shocked quartz, iridium and other impact markers has been found at dozens of sites across multiple continents, all dating to the same narrow window around 12,800 years ago. The impact layer is remarkably consistent. It appears in North America, Europe, South America and the Middle East. If a major impact event did trigger the Younger Dryas, the destruction would have been almost incomprehensible. Imagine tsunamis hundreds of feet high sweeping across every coastline on the planet. Massive flooding as ice sheets collapsed into the ocean. Firestorms across entire continents. Decades of disrupted agriculture as dust and debris blocked sunlight. A civilization concentrated along now submerged coastlines would have been nearly wiped from the geological and archaeological record. The survivors, scattered and reduced to small groups, would have carried fragments of their knowledge into the post-catastrophe world, and they would have done what any survivor of a destroyed civilization would do. They would have tried to preserve what they knew. They would have taught the people they encountered. They would have built monuments designed to survive whatever came next. Gobekli Tepe sits at approximately the same latitude as many of the world's oldest known megalithic sites. It was built immediately after the Younger Dryas ended. Its oldest layers are its most sophisticated. And then it was deliberately buried. That last detail is critical. Around 8000 BC, someone intentionally filled in the stone circles at Gobekli Tepe with rubble and dirt. They buried the entire complex on purpose. This was not abandonment. Abandoned sites crumble and scatter. This was preservation. Someone filled in every gap, covered every pillar, sealed the entire site under tons of fill material. They wanted this place to survive. And because they buried it, it did survive in almost perfect condition for over 10,000 years. Why would you bury a temple? Unless you were afraid it would be destroyed. Unless you had already watched destruction claim everything else you had built. Unless you wanted future generations to find it and understand that you existed. Now consider the flood myths. Every major ancient culture on Earth has a catastrophic flood story. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh describes a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity, with one man warned to build a boat and save the seeds of all living things. The Hebrew Bible tells the story of Noah. The Hindu Matsya Purana describes Manu surviving a world-destroying flood with the help of a divine fish. The Greek myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the Aztec story of Nene and Tata, who survived inside a hollow tree, the Aboriginal Australian stories of a great rising sea that swallowed the land, the Chinese legend of Gunyu and the Great Flood, the Ojibwe story of Wainabuju and the Great Water, the Inca legend of Viracocha rising from Lake Titicaca after a world-destroying flood to teach survivors how to rebuild. Dozens of cultures, separated by oceans, telling the same story with the same structure. A prosperous world, a great flood, near total destruction, a small group of survivors, and a period of rebuilding guided by those who remembered the old knowledge. The standard explanation is that ancient peoples experienced local floods and exaggerated them into myths, and that is a reasonable explanation for any single flood story. But when you have the same narrative structure repeated independently across every inhabited continent, with details that align with what we now know about post-Ice Age sea level rise, you are no longer looking at exaggeration. You are looking at shared memory of a real event, a global catastrophe around 12,800 years ago, one that melted ice sheets, raised sea levels dramatically, and flooded every coastline on Earth, would explain why every culture remembers a great flood. Because it actually happened, and the people who survived it made absolutely sure their descendants would never forget. Now combine the evidence. A global catastrophic event around 12,800 years ago that would have destroyed any coastal civilization. Megalithic sites on every continent showing construction techniques that exceed the supposed capabilities of their credited builders. Gobekli Tepe, built immediately after the catastrophe, with its most advanced work in its oldest layers then deliberately buried for preservation. The Sphinx, showing geological evidence of being thousands of years older than its official date. pyramid complexes on multiple continents align to the same astronomical configurations as they appeared around 10,500 BC, and flood myths in every ancient culture describing the same catastrophe with the same narrative structure. Each piece of evidence on its own can be dismissed. The erosion might be something else, the alignments might be coincidence, the flood myths might be exaggeration, the precision might be underestimating ancient capabilities, but dismissing all of them simultaneously requires a level of motivated reasoning that should make any honest person uncomfortable. So why does mainstream archaeology resist this so fiercely? Part of the answer is institutional. Academic careers are built on the accepted timeline. Textbooks, tenure decisions, funding grants, museum exhibits, documentary series, and entire university departments are structured around the story that civilization began in Mesopotamia around 3000 BC and spread outward from there. Admitting that a sophisticated civilization existed 7,000 years earlier and was destroyed by a cosmic impact would not just rewrite one chapter. It would require throwing out the entire book and starting over. Part of the answer is methodological. Archaeology relies heavily on what can be dug up and dated. If a civilization existed primarily along coastlines that are now under 400 feet of water, the physical evidence is essentially unreachable with current technology. We have mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have mapped of our own ocean floors. Entire mountain ranges, river valleys, and plains that were dry land during the Ice Age now sit under hundreds of feet of seawater, completely unexamined. Absence of evidence, as the saying goes, is not evidence of absence, but in academic culture it is treated that way, and part of the answer is simply human nature. Nobody wants to be the person who overturns the established order. The professional risks are enormous. Robert Schoch was mocked by Egyptologists for decades after publishing his Sphinx erosion study. Danny Hillman Natawidjaja faced intense professional criticism after publishing his Gunung Padang findings. Klaus Schmidt himself was viewed with suspicion by colleagues who could not explain Gobekli Tepe within the existing framework, but also could not deny the dates his team produced. The pattern is consistent. Present evidence that challenges the timeline get dismissed or marginalized. Watch as more evidence accumulates over the years. Wait for the next generation of researchers who did not build their careers defending the old story, but the tide is turning, slowly but unmistakably. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has gained significant support since 2007. The evidence base has expanded from one continent to 4. Gobekli Tepe has forced textbooks to acknowledge that monumental construction predates farming, which was supposed to be impossible. Underwater archaeology is beginning to explore submerged structures off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean. LiDAR technology is revealing previously unknown structures hidden under jungle canopy in Central America and Southeast Asia, structures that nobody knew existed until lasers stripped away the vegetation and exposed what was underneath. And the sheer volume of anomalous sites, from Gunung Padang to Puma Punku to the underwater formations near Yonaguni in Japan, is becoming harder to wave away with each passing year. We are living through a slow-motion revolution in how we understand our own past. And the researchers driving that revolution are not fringe theorists in basements. They are geologists, engineers, astronomers, and archaeologists who are looking at the physical evidence and asking why it does not match the story they were taught. The civilization that existed before Egypt did not leave its name on any monument we have found. It did not leave a library we can read or a city we can walk through. The ocean took most of what it built. Time took the rest. But it left clues in the astronomical alignments of structures on every continent, in the impossible precision of the oldest construction layers, in the flood stories that every culture tells the same way, in the geological evidence that something catastrophic reshaped the world right at the moment our history goes dark. And above all, it left Gobekli Tepe, the oldest known temple on Earth, built by people who should not have been able to build it, with its finest work in its deepest layers, deliberately buried by people who wanted it to survive for whoever came next. Whoever they were, they knew something was coming. They had already watched one world end, and they did everything they could to make sure the next world would know they had existed. Every pyramid on this planet points back to the same question. Not who built them, but who taught the builders. 12,000 years ago, someone knew things we are only now beginning to rediscover. The evidence is in the ground. It is under the ocean. It is carved into stone on every continent. And for the first time in modern history, we are finally starting to listen. If this is the kind of content that keeps you thinking long after the video ends, hit subscribe. There is a lot more to uncover, and the next video goes even deeper into what the ocean has been hiding from us for 12,000 years. Click the video on screen now. I will see you there.